bring in our political panel. Kristen Hahn of Rock Solutions is here, along with Maura Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies. Great to see you both. Maura, we're going to wonk out hard here. I know you're a creature of the House. You worked for a former speaker, and so you get this stuff. Speaker says we're going to take money from the IRS to offset this emergency request, a request that's typically not offset. But by taking that IRS money, it appears he would be increasing the deficit by nearly $30 billion. So who's being straight with the American people here?
And that's really what's frustrating, I think, as a Republican, right? We know what is in the bill. We know that the CBO is going to score it. And the messaging aspect of it is what they were going for, not the actual substance and what would happen with the bill, should it have ever gone anywhere past just being in bill form.
Okay.
The messaging part is that they're saying, okay, the IRS, we're giving them more of taxpayer dollars to take more taxpayer dollars. That to the American people is going to sound terrible, right? Great messaging opportunity for the Republican Party.
Easy to hate the IRS.
Right. However, in actuality, when the CBO came out and said how much it would cost, between 14 and 26 billion, and that is probably not being shared as an addendum to that first message. So it is misleading and disingenuous, and they're going to have to figure out a way to combat that, because if that's their messaging, where do they go from here?
Well, put the messaging aside. We just spoke to Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and she was saying, and she had lunch with the Speaker, they all did, the Senate GOP, and she was saying we need to almost give him a win. She said even she would vote for Israel standalone. If he's able to take this win, doesn't everyone pretty much know that this, what the Democrats would call a poison pill, and this IRS,
right,
can we maybe say gimmick at this point, is not going to make it when it gets to Biden's desk? Because it has no hope anywhere else.
How do you stand tall if you're being placated, right? I mean, that's what's happening here. And he needs and should have wanted to have a position of strength. When you're coming into these negotiations after 3 weeks of an embarrassment of turmoil in the party, that's not really the strongest start. So are they right in having questions about how much money was going into the IRS and how much money is being spent? Government? Yes, absolutely. Is this a time to have that fight and to have that argument when it's attached to an emergency funding bill? Yeah. No.
Okay, so that's the Republican on the panel. I'm afraid to ask Kristen what you think about all of this. But I think the idea here is that Ukraine funding could be the casualty. Is that how you see it if Congress acts on Israel alone?
Certainly. And I think, the CBO score, the CBO is a nonpartisan organization that comes in and scores these things. Anybody who knows these types of bills and those types of pay-fors knew that this was going to happen if somebody asked for it. I think that the more dangerous thing we have to look at, and the new speaker would do well to remember in 2005, the emergency funding that Louisiana got, with all the hurricane damage, to attach, does emergency funding need to be paid for? Now, I've spent my entire career working with moderate Dems and Blue Dogs who want things to be paid for, but there are some exceptions here. So, setting that precedent. But yes, Ukraine, I think you're definitely weakening Mitch McConnell's hand if a standalone bill, they do pass it through the Senate.
But one of the most staunchest hawks in the Republican Party, Lindsey Graham, had a lot to say after that lunch.
He likes this guy.
He likes this
guy. He's the
guy.
man for the moment.
And he says, we also want some definition. Most of us don't want Putin to win. That's not a good thing. But we also want some definition. Is President Biden making the case for Ukraine that people can rally behind, why more U.S. taxpayer dollars should go there? Has he made that case, do you think, well enough to the American people?
I think that it's going to take a lot more work. I think the president's done what he can to use the bully pulpit to talk about our interests abroad and why Ukraine matters and why, what happened with Israel and Hamas matters and how it's all intertwined. I think Lindsey Graham sometimes, the Republicans don't want another loss. I mean, what are you going to do, vacate the chair again? But seriously, I mean, what can make it through the House? And I'm sure I'm not privy to the conversations in the Senate Republican conference, but sounds like there's a debate there about, they know that they need Ukraine funding. But do we go ahead and pass this Israel funding knowing it could be a big problem?
Well, Mark Wayne Mullen, the senator from Oklahoma, brought up the Budapest Memorandum. Not something you ever hear the White House talking about. Maybe they should start explaining some historical context.
Fair enough. You've got Mitch McConnell walking through Louisville with the ambassador to Ukraine, and it does make you wonder here. But motion to vacate is an important point to bring up here. It's technically not changed. What makes us think if they're not going to increase the threshold to fire the speaker, this doesn't happen again in a couple of weeks or months?
I think that may have gone into the calculations of what Mike Johnson is doing here by by looking to appease the far right, by even proposing this in the first place. And again, we know this isn't going to go anywhere, but maybe this is what he's going to use to then negotiate again, because they have very little capital to stand on given what happened with the speaker's vacancy for 3 weeks. So I think looking at it from that aspect, but I also think on the foreign policy, he's not going to be the person that's going to convince the Republican Party why it's important to support our allies. And quite frankly, neither is President Biden. The person who's doing the most for Ukraine right now is President Zelensky. He's the one who's reminding us why it's important for us to be firm and standing with our allies around the world. Netanyahu telling us why we need to stand firm with our allies. That should really be a question for us here at home. Why are we not hearing from the top?
Well, he did send Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin to the Hill to make the case
True.
yesterday.
I mean, Tony Blinken dressed up his son as Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday and brought him to the White House, which was an interesting take.
Is he making a point to the boss there?
I think so, on Halloween. But when you look at foreign policy and this big package the White House asked for, it included the southern border. Is that one place potentially that can bring not just House and Senate Republicans together, but also the House and the Senate?
Absolutely. Republicans are going to go into the campaign. And again, this bill, unfortunately, the CBO report is going to be plastered on every Democratic strategist's plan to how to target Republicans. But the American people largely believe that Republicans are best equipped to handle things on the economy and security. So if they were to go into these negotiations, they're going to need to explain to the American people why they voted against a border security chunk of funding right there. So it will play into how they look ahead to the campaign for 2024.
All right, our panel sticking with us. Coming up, Donald Trump, speaking of 2024, Jr., his son, testifying today in former President Trump's New York fraud trial. Our political panel will be back with us after the break as the kids take the stand. This is Balance of Power. Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies. Thank you both for joining us. Okay, so it's not just Don Jr., though. Eric Trump, next week Ivanka Trump. What do we expect his children to say? It's a very tight-knit family, and for the most part, they have backed their father, even when they didn't agree behind the scenes. But now they're going to be under oath.
So far, what I've seen and what I kind of expected was to find other people to blame and say they took on a majority of our finances. We were barely involved, which is what Donald Trump Jr. said today, was that we trusted him entirely to handle it. And you can just see that that's going to be the route they go. I believe both their attorney and their financial advisor have already testified as well, saying we were not that involved. So it's just going to be a he said, she said, he said kind of game, I think.
Is there even a political side to this? He's got 4 indictments, for crying out loud, and maybe more serious legal challenges. At the same time, it's his brand they're talking about, and this seems to get under his skin more than any of the other 91 counts that he's facing.
Because it's always been about his brand. I mean, we saw when he was very first running for president, he had his Trump-branded stakes behind him, at the rally.
Yeah.
So I think it's always been about that. Do I think that his kid's testimony is going to have any real impact? I mean, if everything that's happened so far has not had that much of an impact as far as him being the front runner in the in the Republican presidential race, I don't see how this will. But I agree. I think it's all he said. She said they're following their father's footsteps. That's what he's done traditionally with his staff and the people that work for him. So,
but at the same time, it does feel like for some in the Republican Party that they've been going after every aspect of the former president's life, his political life, his private life. Does this play into the hand of this is quote unquote a witch hunt? Does this potentially help the former president when you look at his political career potentially next year?
I mean, I think the people who are going to be ride or die with President Trump no matter what, it will definitely play into their feelings about the witch hunt. For those people who, you talk to who are just exhausted, that voted for him before but don't want again or looking for other candidates, I think, I don't think it's going to have something.
It's just more drama.
It's just more drama, more of the same, and you just keep piling on.
That's the potential for it to backfire, right? And the idea of indictment fatigue, which is something we've talked about a lot here. I mean, if he's going to be spending every other day in court for the next year and his base doesn't care, then these numbers don't move.
I think it'd be really hypocritical, though, for people to say, which I guess shouldn't be surprising, but for people to say, it's overreaching and it's all for show to have the Trump kids there on the stand and then also want to have Hunter Biden held accountable for the dealings he made. So when you're looking at it, again, Eric and Donald Trump Jr. all had EVP roles at the company. They had very high titles, at least, and so were integrally involved. So I think it's hard to sit there and say, sure, it's okay to do it to Hunter, but it's not okay to do it to Trump and vice versa. So, I mean, to me, I just think that it has been too intertwined, and we really need to move beyond. both Trump and
Well, moving on, we weren't really going to discuss this, but he was just speaking on the House floor a little bit ago. And it's George Santos. Let me bring you a quote of what he said. The loss of presumption of innocence established a dangerous precedent. Santos said, I'm fighting to clear my name in front of the entire world. It hasn't been easy. Do you expect an expulsion of this man?
I mean, it's pretty damning what's up against him. House Ethics Committee, it's, when they're looking at a case like this, they're outside. It's not his fellow members that are looking at him. They bring in other former members to come in and assess these cases. So I do think that they're looking at this from, again, an outside looking in and all the facts that's in front of them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look good for George Santos.
Well, it's interesting because we've got a potential expulsion vote that you're talking about.
This
But the
evening.
Ethics Committee is asking lawmakers to slow the roll here, Krista. They said we kicked out 37 subpoenas and reviewed more than 170,000 documents. Give us a minute. We're onto something. How does this come to a close then?
I'm not sure exactly how it comes to a close, but if I'm a Republican, I want George Santos gone. I mean, he's a huge political liability headed into next year.
And would you like your name to be on it?
I mean, no.
Or is it better for the Ethics Committee?
I think it's hard to say when you're looking at, there are some members of the Republican Party in the House that continue to defend him. So what are the motivations there? I think, if I'm a rank and file member of the House, particularly, like I said, one of those freshmen who are in these tough seats in New York or elsewhere across the country, I want him gone. Yeah. The focus there isn't helpful for anybody. And it's not helpful for the Congress, writ large.
Where our colleagues on the Hill says no one showed up to defend him on the House floor. So we get a sense of where things are. But at the same time, you're saying if you're a Republican, you want him out. But he still is a vote. And this majority is getting slimmer by the day. Don't they need his vote?
They need to work across the aisle. That's what they really need to be doing. But yes, they should want it. But to this point here, they should want to grow their majority. Yeah. And the way to grow their majority is to appeal to the American people and win elections. And we're not going to win elections if we put up George Santos candidates. So this should be a lesson to actually run with integrity.
See, every vote counts, but is there a difference between 4 and 5? I
Well,
don't know.
have you looked at the data behind New York? A lot of New Yorkers don't go out to vote.
Well, they might this time, right?
True.
Kristen Hahn, Maura Gillespie, great conversation, and thank you. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks so much.